p.m. Thursday, February 8th, meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission at the Rockbridge County Administrative Offices with a full contingent of commissioners on hand. And I will see if anyone would like to approve this agenda, if we have any changes, additions, or are we good to go with what we have?
I move to approve it as presented.
I second.
Actually,
Okay.
I have a question about this. Is this something that we're adding?
The entrance corridor overlay district handout.
That will be hopefully helpful in item number 19. Your zoning text amendments.
Ah, okay, thank you. Then, yeah.
And I think we're gonna see if maybe we can spend an hour on the discussion of the remaining items, or as many as we can do in about an hour, if that seems okay. Okay. So we had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes from the January 25th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? And do we have any suggestions for corrections, additions, clarifications?
Oh, they're
Really good.
excellent as usual.
Having, yes, having been at the meeting, I
I
recognize.
move to approve the minutes as presented. Second.
Okay, we got a motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Now, with the citizens here in their dozens, we will ask if any would like to come up to comment on matters not on the agenda. Citizens' comments portion closed. And so we'll move on to new business, which is our annual zoning ordinance amendments 2024-01. This is the so-called batch A. And Arnie will, as I said, we'll try to see what we can do in an hour. Okay. So Arnie, take it away. Where are we? What do you want to do?
During your last meeting, you made it through chickens as item number 13. If we could pick up with number 14, which is on page 34 of your packet. In this, I may need some help, or at least support, for remembering when we added short-term rentals to the zoning ordinance in 2017. But we have a limitation for short-term rentals to only one booking per night, but it's not as clear as it could be. There have been instances where proprietors are attempting in a short-term rental to rent out and advertise the rooms individually, and to circumvent their thought that that's allowed. I would like a little bit of support in the code that says a booking is only for one booking per evening. So you cannot rent out, if you're doing type A where you can do up to 2 rooms, you can't rent out the 2 rooms individually to 2 different individuals or groups and under 2 different bookings. So we're asking you to consider a limitation of only 1 booking per nightly rental to be added to the short-term rental use and design standards. And for those of you that were here, I am correct, am I not, that there was never an intent for this to be a mini motel where the rooms either type A or type B, where you can rent it out your entire house. There was never the intent for that to occur. So,
Right.
Right.
I think that's my understanding.
And is that mostly happening in RLC and in the commercial district, or is it's not happening
For
residential, is it?
one particular instance in the R1 zoning district.
Oh, well, and especially that, we have such tight limits on the number of days and all. All right. Okay. Yes. Yes.
So,
No, this language is good.
I went back through and tried to read, and other than, I only provide you also with a short section here, not the entire use and design standards for short-term rentals, but booking transaction currently means any transaction in which there is a change to a transient by a charge to a transient by a host for the occupancy of any dwelling, sleeping, or lodging accommodations. And then we get into type A and type B. So it's not as clear again as it could be, I think, that you can only have 1 booking per night.
So I wonder if it would be helpful to say per property.
Okay. If we're going to
Because
flip,
I think if there's a misunderstanding, if somebody has a misunderstanding about whether they can do what you're, do this more than one transaction in, they may actually see each of those rooms as a short-term rental property. Or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
so on page 35 in the red, and only one booking transaction is permitted per property per night rental. Is that the suggestion?
I think that would, I think that would do what I'm, or would answer what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And you could put that in and leave the rest as permitted per property per nightly rental of a short-term rental operation. You can put that in and leave the rest as well.
Right.
Okay, so just to read that
Yeah.
again, in the red portion, so the addition to the definitions for booking transaction, and only one booking transaction is permitted per property per nightly rental of a short-term rental operation.
Yeah.
Okay, to batch A that? Yeah.
Yes.
Is that okay, everybody? Yes? Okay, yep, batch A.
Right, flipping over to number 15, we're going to talk about fences and height regulations. Article 4 and 4.2 in particular regulates areas and yards. And in that section, there's a maximum fence height of 7 feet for fences, walls, and hedges. And then we also have added landscaping regulations in the 2017 updated zoning ordinance. And in subsection F, it allows fences and walls in any residential district not to exceed 7 feet in height to exceed 7 feet in height with the approval of a conditional use permit. And then subsection G allows fences and walls in any commercial district to exceed 8 feet in height with the approval of a conditional use permit. So I've got a little bit of a gap of a foot where in areas and yards, it says maximum of 7. And then in 14, it says that you can actually have a fence up to 8 feet in height. And above that, if you go through a conditional use permit. So I need to sort of bridge that gap. And you could do it in one of two ways. So the staff recommendation, first option there is to change the areas and yards so that in a residential zoning district, you have an 8 feet height limit in commercial and 7 feet in height in residential areas and 8 feet in height in commercial zoning districts. And then the other option that's listed below in subsection G is to change the 8 feet for commercial zoning districts down to 7 feet. If you were asked my preference, I would actually recommend that second option because we have many more instances where fences, walls, hedges, so areas in yards, section 4 gets applied much more often than our landscaping standards do in section 14. Because in the landscaping standards where those buffer requirements come in, where that only really applies for new development when you have in very limited instances, which I didn't cover, where you have commercial districts or something going in a commercial district next to a residential area. So that's not going to get applied as often. So perhaps instead of allowing fences all over the place to go up to 8 feet, perhaps we change the walls and fences in the landscaping section in the commercial districts to be up to 7 feet in height. And then they still have the ability to go for a conditional use permit anyway, to go if they need additional height above the 7 feet in that instance.
So are you recommending the section 420-4.2, the language in red, is that what
Actually,
you're?
the second one, the 14.8 G would be my recommendation. You can fix it either way.
Gee, okay.
And it's not much red there, but yeah.
And then, and where do hedges fall in all this? Because part of this language talks about fences and walls and part of it is in hedges.
The hedges is just up in the areas and yards. So you still have that height limit that's currently in the areas and yards section. And then when we're talking about landscaping requirements, it's only talking about fences and walls.
Okay.
And I can look to see if there's something else in the landscaping that actually allows the hedge.
And do we have a definition of a hedge?
Likely not. but I'll check.
Is a
quickly.
hedge like a certain number of linear feet in order to qualify for a hedge? As opposed to, like
A shrub or a tree. or
what about arborvitaes? If you plant a row of arborvitaes along your property,
You don't
is
have
that a hedge?
Yeah.
Because they grow a lot taller than 7 feet.
in other in other zoning ordinances, there will be more specific. We don't have much in the way for landscaping requirements. And in other instances, I'm aware that within one growing season, you have to plant something that within one growing season can produce an opaque screening up to at least 6 feet in height, as an example. So that's fairly common, but we don't have that. So the arborvitae that are planted and within 1 year, we really don't have something that requires that or allows that, I guess. So your first question was hedge, or second question actually was hedge.
Yeah, do we have a
I
definition of
don't think
hedge?
you do. We do not.
Arnie, well, I'll wait.
Also in the buffering section. So in landscaping, we have the landscaping requirements, the buffering, when you have to put in a buffer between commercial and residential, just as an example, it does say plants should be sufficiently large and planted in such a fashion that a year-round screen at least 6 feet in height shall be produced within one growing season. So I lied a second ago. We do actually have that in our code.
So at least 6 feet, but not more than 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's going to be pretty limiting.
Why do we have hedges in there? Just, I can think of,
It's at least 6, so you can up to 7, and then maybe prune it. But pardon?
why do we have hedges in there? Is that really, I mean, I know it does create a screen, but I can think of some properties in our neighborhood that they're actually like fir trees, but they're close enough to make a hedge that are quite tall, but it blocks the road, but not anyone's view.
I'm not sure I'm answering and understand the question. When there's a required buffer, and let's say you don't have enough area to put in a hedge, then the fence can be a space saving issue. And that's why lots of landscape standards have the ability to put in a hedge as a screen, or if that's not available, then a fence. But I'm not understanding in your residential to residential example what the question is.
Okay, so this would only apply into a buffer.
Mhm.
So why wouldn't we allow a hedge to be larger than 7 feet? Oh,
To be honest, nobody's going to enforce the
yeah.
8-foot
Wonder we
hedge.
can we just take out the word hedge or?
You could if you want. So you then mean in the
In areas and yards.
in the areas and yards.
So it would just be fences and walls.
Mhm.
Is this
So
front, the front of the property and the back, the sides, anywhere? Or
areas and yards is anywhere, and the landscape work standards, it depends on where the adjacency is. In other words, if you have a multifamily building and a single family, then it would be whatever the shared property line is, which wouldn't be front, I wouldn't imagine, but it would be
Yeah.
sides or back.
Arnie, what do you think the logic was for the difference between the 7 and the 8? I'm just
Don't-
making a guess that in commercial areas, you would probably want some additional separation.
Mhm.
Of
So
use.
just in the landscaping standards between F and G, you mean why would there be a 7 feet in F?
Well, why 7 feet in residential and 8 feet in commercial? Just trying to understand the original logic for that. And I mean, 7 feet is me with my arms stretched out, which is 8 feet would be you and your arms stretched out. I could be in the residential and you could be in the commercial.
And
But I'm
neither of
just
you
trying
is
to
going to see
understand
over the
I
fence.
think it's just the more intense uses in the commercial, and
Yeah.
therefore you can have a little bit more before you have to go to the conditional use permit.
Right. That's what I'm thinking is the logic. So does that still prevail, or what I'm saying 7 feet is fine for commercial too?
What do we do? We don't have, do we have requirements or height limits in the parks and open space?
It's an open space. Yeah,
I would just,
I'm all in. Other than what we are talking about now for fences and hedges and whatnot, do you mean for buildings and structures?
no, for fences and hedges. I
Okay.
assume we don't have limits and like for ball fields and,
This is going to apply to all sections. The areas and yards.
okay, so you just have to get a conditional use permit for, okay.
Oh,
Because it said
as
all
an-
residential and all commercial. It didn't say parks and open space. That's what I was wondering. It's
okay.
kind of the
and then,
in between spot.
yeah, I guess if you have the batting cage or the net or the
Right.
thing, how would that be treated?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
I
think
didn't know
you're-
if it was addressed somewhere else.
yeah, no, you're correct, because in here, it's only for the residential and commercial, and POS is certainly not one of those two. Not, sometimes we struggle with RLC, which one is it?
Yeah. Right.
Which side does it go to? But no, parks and open space would not be the landscaping. And then also we have to remember that in the landscaping section, that only applies in very limited instances when a buffer is required, and a buffer is only required. Where a commercially zoned development abuts a residential zoning district, or where multifamily residential development abuts any property zoned R1 or R2.
Yeah.
That's it. So parks and open space isn't one.
Okay. And then getting back to Shannon's point, I mean, I think most people want a hedgerow or trees or something as a buffer, and you certainly, I see that as different. Having something living is different than a fence or a wall. I agree with the fence and wall recommendation, but
If this is trying to say, I guess, if you're gonna put up a fence, then that's the height. And then if I'm certainly comfortable if you are with striking hedge to allow that extra screening if somebody wants that extra screening.
I would say yes.
Okay, so I think there are two things on the table. One is striking hedge so that somebody can have a much taller living thing. And then you still have a decision on which of the two options, if you want to go forward with sort of addressing this discrepancy between 7 and 8 feet.
So again, I'm just asking the question, trying to understand why the difference, because yes, it's a discrepancy, but is it there for a reason that you want 8 feet in a commercial area? And that's all I'm.
My sense is that commercial areas are less beautiful and you want to hide them more.
right.
But, or you want to be able to hide offensive looking commercial uses. If you're a commercial property owner, you might want to not have people know, not that you're hiding anything, but just that you don't want that to be the public face of your business. And so you might want to have that 8-foot fence, a little bit higher so you don't encroach on your neighbor's view. So, protecting other people from
Right.
whatever you've got going on.
So that the residents on the other side might want a higher wall, in other words, that this is, we're talking about the buffer between commercial and residential, that we're saying the residents would be like, yeah, put a higher wall. I don't want to see any of that. Or would they think of a higher wall being an eyesore in and of itself? They've got this big,
Potentially both.
Yeah.
I mean, that could,
yeah,
it depends,
cut either
probably
way.
depends on who the
Yeah.
owner is, the landowner. I mean, the residential property owner.
But now you could put a
Mhm.
10-foot hedge in front of it and you don't see the wall.
Right, yeah.
That's right.
Without
So
me
if,
standing up and.
Yeah.
so if we think that that would be sort of a case specific judgment,
About 7 feet.
Show off.
So is that enough? And that's, I guess, the question, right, Arnie? I mean, what I'm getting at is it's not so much the difference between the inconsistency, is it functionally the right height that we're asking?
I'm curious why are we being asked to make this change? Is it just the inconsistency?
Right, because right now, and maybe a little bit of history, we already had the yards and areas 7-foot requirement in, and then in the 2017 update, we added landscaping.
Mhm.
So we have 7 foot in one location and then 7 and 8 in the other location. So there's a little discrepancy there. So we're just trying to address when somebody comes in and asks, what is my maximum fence height in a residential district or in a commercial district, that we can give them the right answer.
And are you finding that having this discrepancy, sorry, we're fixing a discrepancy just between residential and commercial? Is that, this one was a little bit confusing to me.
In the yards and areas, it allows a fence or wall height or up to 7 feet.
Right,
So it just says flat 7 feet.
Right.
Shall not exceed 7 feet in a residential zoning district.
right?
So then in the landscaping standards, and again, the landscaping standards are not going to be implemented all that often because it's only in rare instances where the buffer has to go in. But in the instance where one does have to go in a residential area, it's going to be up to 7 feet, and then the 8 feet comes in play, excuse me, for the commercial.
So I'm just wondering whether it doesn't,
I said that
it's just
partly.
a difference between residential and commercial. Is that,
Well, sorry, I read that partly wrong. I'm gonna start over. In the areas and yards, so existing language, 420-4.2 areas and yards. C, all yards and courts required by this chapter shall be open and unobstructed to the sky with the following authorized encroachments. So in a yard, your front yard, side yard, rear yard, open from ground to sky, but with the following encroachments allowed. Fences, wall, hedges may be permitted in any required yard, provided that no fence, wall, hedge along any yard shall be over 7 feet in height. So that's not tied to a commercial district or a residential.
Mhm.
So 7 feet in height maximum. But we have this allowance that goes up to 8 feet
Right.
without a conditional use permit in the commercial. So I've got a 1 foot discrepancy that I've got to
Right.
address.
So there's the contradiction between 420-4.2 and 420-14.8. And then there's the discrepancy between the two heights, and we can resolve the contradiction by either making them both 7 or just cleaning that up in the language, basically, is what you're giving us, right?
Right.
Sounds like are most people leaning towards 7 and 8? Is that what we're hearing, or
I kind of am.
I sort of am too?
Yeah, I
If
am
that's
too.
not a problem to enforce,
And taking out the word hedges, I think we were
Yeah.
talking about also. in the
Actually,
earlier-
I do have another question. Oh, so all yards and courts, this is sort of very broad language, shall be open and unobstructed to the sky. What about trees? If
Well, no.
hedges, well, no, seriously, if hedges
Hedges
were,
are there.
only up to 7 feet, a tree obstructs the sky quite a bit more than a hedge does.
That's, we're talking
So-
about yards and areas. So in your front yard, side yard, rear yard, it's supposed to be an open space. So therefore, it's supposed to be open to the sky,
Right?
but
But if
hopefully
we're
going
regulating
fine.
hedges, then it seems like we're also talking about trees.
So maybe we're talking about unobstructed by
Unobstructed.
human
Thing.
produced constructions.
So then that should be made clear, because gosh, I think it would be very easy to read that as I just did, as
We should
including
cut down some
trees.
trees.
Exactly.
Never even considered
But
that.
But is
but
this,
if it
but
makes
maybe
you
you think of the sky as where the branches start. That's where the sky is.
Ah, okay.
You can certainly add that. I've never read it that way, and I certainly wouldn't have applied it or asked anybody to cut
Right.
down their trees because they're in the
Well, nor
open
would we
area.
want you to.
But if we take out hedges, that'll fix it pretty much. I mean, I think that'll fix it.
No.
Demand prune
No.
trees.
Or you can add, like Pat said, man-made. I would just take out hedges and I
Just take out hedges. I don't think anyone's gonna,
And I would say encroachments are, going back to what Pat said, I don't think a tree is an encroachment.
right.
Just to follow that a little bit, just
Hmm?
the rest of the section
But I
that
could be-
has the authorized encroachments. So again, fences, wall, hedges that we're dealing with. There's also an allowance for handicap accessible ramps. And the things that we added more recently in the last 2 or 3 years is an allowance for porches and balconies, deck stoops and landings. and also projecting horizontal architectural features to encroach up to 3 feet into a side yard. So we did those minor tweaks for belt courses and chimneys and other things to encroach a little bit into those required areas. So that's what we currently have in the yards and areas for encroachments.
I just think the sky is really high up there.
Right. So I mean, I think if we really want to make that clear, we could put in a, unobstructed by man-made structure, something
Yes.
along those lines, if that, but I don't think that's really to the issue of what we're dealing with
No,
here.
it is absolutely
Um,
not.
So,
I just,
yeah, so that's one where I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know if we
Language.
need to change that. So I don't know, does someone would like to make a suggestion here on what we, or should I make a suggestion? I'm reading it that I think it sounds like we want to get rid of hedges from the areas and yards section. And I think we want to leave, have it differentiate 7 feet for residential, 8 feet for commercial. And so which one of these would achieve that for us? Do we then need, where do we make the change? Just in areas and yards?
I think what you're saying is the one in areas and yards,
Yeah.
which is your first option, which would say fences, wall, hedges may be permitted in any required yard, provided no fence, wall along any yard shall be over 7 feet in height in residential zoning districts. I guess that should be a nor, or 8 feet in height in commercial zoning districts.
Yeah,
So
and that,
option A and strike hedges.
I think so. Is that what?
Yep.
We seem like we want, okay. Put that in there and
In
send it
batch
to,
A.
send it to batch A. Yeah. Okay.
I may have given you too much in number 16.
It's like a
Admittedly,
test that I graded.
it was odd. We were trying to
Right.
find use and design standards
Yeah.
for mini warehouses, which we could find a lot, and we thought we could find a lot more for gas stations and electric vehicle charging stations in particular, and could find almost nothing there. So
Yeah.
start out the one where we found perhaps too much for you to consider for mini warehouses. Now, this is sort of perhaps a staff opinion, but to back up a half of a step, we have had 2 inquiries about adding mini warehouses into the city in the last, say, 2 years. One is on the parcel directly behind Sheets that's open in onto Evergreen Place and right across from the cemetery. And another place is behind the Public Works yard off of Shop Road, that area of town. Now that part of town is not zoned commercial, so there would have to be a commercial rezoning. And just to mention that many warehouses are only allowed in the city by conditional use permit in the C2 zoning district. But because of the quality of many warehouses that I've noticed, I was sort of thinking that may not be the type of development that we would want to encourage in town, because we have such limited areas for development. And I've given you some sections of the comprehensive plan here that talks about development to be more of efficient use of space. Sorry, I can't find it quickly, but it's so if we're going to allow a relatively low investment for a typical mini warehouse where there are a whole bunch of garage doors, nothing but gravel in between them, and people drive up, is that the type of development that we want to allow? Or would we like to develop some use and design standards that would require something a little bit better than the absolute standard mini warehouse type development?
Yeah, there are a couple parcels that are not prime real estate, and we got the proposal from Russ Orson about the one mini warehouse, whether that's a good location or not. But I agree that there are some potential places where it might be okay to have them. So yes, I would like to have some better design and use standards for them. But I do
Yeah.
think it's this batch B. Just I think we need a day or two to really, like, I didn't see lighting on there or height, and I didn't know. But
and maybe also hedges. Dare I say it? A landscaping
Oh.
screen, like a requirement for a landscaping screen. Like if there was going to be one over by the cemetery, I think we would want to require, or any open space, I think you'd want to require a hedge. not just a fence, maybe even.
And those would be, that's a good point in the sense that if we take the property that's behind Sheets, which is C2, be a conditional use permit. And if we had standards, but we also have to look at the landscaping standards. So the landscaping standards would require a buffer to that portion of the property that's across the street. That's going to be our R1 zoning district, which is the house that's left after we subdivided everything off, after we take care of rezoning over there, but not the cemetery, because the cemetery's parks and open space, as was mentioned just a bit ago. So we could certainly have some additional standards for landscaping if you want to go forward with this mini warehouse set of use and design standards.
Yeah.
Is it worthwhile getting into them, or do you?
John, you look like you're on the verge of speech.
No, I think I agree with Leslie that this is a B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a B batch and I think it, and also, yes, some kind of landscaping standards beyond what we normally do or have, which is little, would be good.
Thank you for doing so much of the work.
Yeah,
yeah,
It'll be
yeah,
easier when we
yeah.
get to it.
Yeah.
It is a substantial enough potential development to spend more time on. So,
Especially with all of the housing coming in at the VDOT property, could definitely envision something in that area. I had one little question when I went through all that, you know, some of the, I don't know, it's under J, but I'm not sure what that is. Is that, just the definition? Oh, anyway, what does facades should be appear to have between 30 and 70% transparency? What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Transparency is, sorry, I should pass these around. Photograph of just a typical one story and a photograph of a multi-story
Okay,
that's in Charlottesville.
okay.
That one would not be transparency. You pass that around
Yeah.
if you don't mind. There, you can have transparency in, I had to look it up. I think what they're getting at is fenestration. So you have to have not big blank walls like those do. You have to have at least 30% in glass or door openings to give it that transparency. So transparency, I also looked up in wherever we found this from and did not have a definition of transparency. So sometimes they use the word fenestration. Fenestration means openings in a facade, be it glass, be it doorways. So you would at least have, if you required a minimum of fenestration or transparency, you would be requiring at least a minimum of not that portion of being a blank wall.
Right.
We could do better, but I think that's the intent.
That's a nice little guideline. Mhm.
Now, these are two good examples, aren't they?
and yeah, and I can see this when they're trying to make it look nice, right? I think they're, architecturally and so forth. I think you would address a lot of the stuff in here about, how, but yes, it is just a lot of blank walls. Yeah.
The other thing to also keep in mind is this is going to mean a C2 zoning district is the only place that it is allowed as a conditional
Yeah.
use permit. So that automatically brings your entrance corridor use and design standards into play. So you could either add, we could either add landscaping in this section for mini warehouses above and beyond, but you also have the opportunity to add them to the entrance corridor when we get to that discussion.
Okay.
So I
So,
believe I'm
yeah.
hearing batch B.
Yes, batch B.
Yeah. So the gasoline stations, item number 17, when we had the sheets go in, not when the sheets went in, way after the sheets went in. We more recently had the Tesla power stations or charging stations added to the sheets. And we could allow that because it was an accessory use to the gasoline station. I thought we could find something called there was a more generic word, a fueling station or some other definition that would include and not be so limited to the definition that we currently have. The definition that we currently have for a gasoline station is any place of business with fuel pumps and underground storage tanks, which provides fuels and oils for motor vehicles. A store associated with automobile fuel sales shall be considered a gasoline station. Well, that doesn't really allow for natural gas, hydrogen, and electricity to fuel vehicles, which we now have. So in the absence of finding something that was really more generic, we thought perhaps we could change at the minimum the definition and of an electric vehicle charging station and add the electric vehicle charging station as a use to the gasoline station definition. And then also for your consideration, if desired, to add something to our parking standards.
Yeah.
So at least we have something. We don't have the full blown use and design standards for what this fueling station would be and could be. And we're also not going to have many new fueling stations but in the absence of that, at least we can add something of a definition and make it clear in the gasoline station definition that we currently have that electric vehicle charging is allowed. And then maybe also address it to make it apparent that it is also an approved accessory use for a off-street parking space.
Does that mean even residential or?
Yes, and I believe so because the off-street parking spaces, we're talking about all of section 12 and all of section 12 even applies to residential because if you have a new residence, you're supposed to provide 2 residential unit, we're supposed to provide 2 off-street parking spaces. And this also came up with, as an example, Jordan Street. There's a gentleman in his front yard digging a ditch and putting this thing in. And then I got the building inspector involved because I didn't know what it was. Come to find out the gentleman was putting in his own little charging station. So his own little post with the charger and the cable going back to the house. So I think it would be nice to have something in the parking section that makes it allowed.
Yeah.
That makes it evident that it is allowed as opposed to not addressing it, which we currently don't. And then somebody could argue, well, it's not in there, so therefore you're not supposed to have this. And that's a bit ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah.
So this is a way to at least make it a thing that is allowed.
So we have two issues. I mean, we're addressing 2 things. The gasoline station definition is one, and then design standards is a second.
Yeah.
On the first one, on the gasoline station, it's a wording issue, a small thing, Arnie. An establishment engaged in the retail sale of motor vehicle fuel that is stored on site. So, that applies to that would apply to gasoline, diesel, natural gas, and hydrogen, but electricity is not stored on site. I
Indeed.
just caught that in reading
Yeah,
it today,
good
so
point.
that might be that's just a wordplay to sort out.
Maybe the stored on site's just not needed.
Right, you could take out that is stored on site. So an establishment engaged in the retail sale of motor vehicle fuel, such as.
Mhm.
Okay.
So is there any thought to changing gasoline station?
Yeah.
And changing it to motor vehicle fuel station or vehicle fuel station or fuel station
Yeah.
rather than a gasoline station?
And then that
like
way
that.
we combine the 2 and be done with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I think I was just out trying to find this new thing, but you're
Mm.
right. We could actually make the new thing,
Yeah.
make it perfectly fine.
Agreed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, for everyone, that means combining the 2 definitions into a fueling station or however we want to put it, and then combining the 2 things into one. So we only have one new definition.
Right.
That then would also require a change to the use matrix because we currently have gasoline station in there. So we would just have
Yeah.
to make that change there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Okay.
It's great.
For if someone's doing their, do it at home, electric, fueling thing, does that bring in question of, say, a building inspector to, I mean, do they have to have another circuit set up? And I mean, I don't understand the,
Electrical, they will need an electrical permit.
Yeah.
they're going to be pulling new wire to a different location,
Mhm.
and they're probably going to be pulling a 220 wire. So that
Mhm.
will be an electrical permit.
Right.
Yes.
And that spot that the fellow digging his own, that's on his property, not by the curb, not for on this.
Completely on his
own
property.
Right,
Very nice setup, completely on his property.
right.
In the front of the house, in the front
In
yard.
the front.
But I've seen that and somebody else has done it too, but they're having to deal with the sidewalk as well. But I guess the building inspector will take care of that. I think right now they're running a cord across the sidewalk, but they have it
Oh,
taped down.
that was addressed. If this is the one I'm thinking about on South Jefferson,
Right.
that was addressed because somebody called it in. It is a trip hazard.
Mhm.
And the building official had several conversations with that vehicle owner. And that vehicle owner has now found a couple of different locations to do his charging without having the cord across the street.
I saw,
Would they have the flexibility that where they could have bored under the sidewalk or not really? I guess it,
They were,
oh,
yeah, and they were limited on that property. I don't even think they had a curb cut to get off,
yeah,
across the sidewalk. So they were limited there.
Okay.
But after we,
worked out.
yeah, we had to address it because it was a trip hazard.
Mm.
recently I saw a picture allowed, I think it was in Massachusetts. You could put a cord again across the sidewalk, but you had to have a little raised
Oh, that. right.
cover on it, like you have in auditoriums and stuff like,
Mhm.
so that it was protected.
I think he actually did have that.
Yeah, he did it for a
Yeah.
period of time.
Still
Right.
sounds dangerous.
So are we good with are we good with the parking, the parking, suggestion in red under J for design standards?
Absolutely.
We're good with
yes,
that.
Yes.
And then,
I gotta make one addition
Yeah.
to Jay, sorry, before we
Yeah.
move on. I realized reading this earlier, I would like to strike the part that says as shown on an approved site plan.
Okay.
So it would read any off-street parking space that meets the minimum requirements of this article may also include a charging station for electric vehicles. That
yeah,
would be everywhere, so not just where we're approving site
Right.
plans.
right. Okay, and then should we then leave it to Arnie and Kate to come up, replace the definition for gasoline station and combine those and put that into batch A?
That's a good point. So the next step, after we get all the batch A things together, we can put that into one draft and bring it back to you for one last review before it goes out to public hearing being advertised.
Sure.
We could do that for
Yep.
your next meeting. You could have a shot at that
Yeah,
next meeting
that's
to
great.
review the definition as combined.
Good.
But Pat, before
Yes.
we move on,
Mhm.
on the off-street parking, is this an opportunity to consider any other potential needs in the zoning code vis-a-vis the electric vehicle charging? Or have we covered it by this? That's what I'm,
Well, we patched it by this, so I don't know what you mean by all the other needs. We're certainly going to have, we will likely have to have more language when we actually have more charging stations in a public parking lot potentially, or other locations, curbside in the downtown. But this at least gets us to the step where it's allowed explicitly in our code and may not have that full set of use and design standards that we may still need.
yeah. No, thanks, Arnie. That's a good approach. And that's what I thought today, that when I was reading this, that this is the fix for batch A.
Yeah.
Do we want to consider in the future a more substantial review of electric vehicle charging? As, just to promote it and support it. So.
Okay, cool. Move on to 18. Same ballpark.
Indeed. When we were doing the approvals for the charging stations, realized that we really don't have much in the way of allowing signage for those electric vehicle charging. And I can't remember, the station is the thing and the ports, 2 ports on one, but it's very similar to the gasoline pump where we currently don't have an allowance for any signage on a gasoline pump. So the thought was, in the language that we have for signage, there are a list of exempt signs. So as you know, for each frontage, you have so much square footage allowed in the C2 zoning district, which is 2 square feet per lineal frontage. And then you can divide that up, your allowance for signage with a freestanding sign, wall sign, projecting sign. But there are exemptions to those. So the one way to address this allowance specifically for fuel pumps and electric vehicle charging stations is to allow a certain limited amount of signage for each of those. It could be 2 square feet as provided in your example. It could be 1, it could be whatever number you want. And then that amount would not count against what their calculation is based on. So again, in C2 zoning district, where most of these electric vehicle charging stations, gasoline stations are going to be, they have an amount that's 2 square feet of signage allowed per lineal frontage. So whatever that total is, they can then split up between freestanding and the other types of signage they need. And then if we exempted it as it's provided here, the 2 square feet or the 1 square feet, whatever you're comfortable with per pump or per charging station would not count against that total.
With the Tesla ones at Sheets, are we talking about just where it says Tesla on each one of those, and that's kind of counting as a signage? Is that what we're talking about?
That, and also sometimes yeah, that's what we're talking about.
And am I imagining it? But aren't on gasoline pumps aren't there signs all over them, right?
There are,
Right. I mean, not just now the moving pictures because there's a television on it, that you can't turn off, but there's signs, all over them, right?
there are.
There are. Okay.
So
I
this
just wanted to make sure I wasn't
addresses
imagining.
part of that issue.
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't quite realize that either until
Yeah.
going through this and made that realization. There's already stuff on the pump.
All of them. Right. And so, and those are mostly ads for things other than the gasoline itself.
It can
Right.
be.
And is that allowed?
It's not allowed, right?
Well, it's one of those things that those pumps have gone in. I can't tell you what the sign requirements were for when those pumps went in. But for the allowance of signage, I think it makes sense to go ahead and allow something not just to address the electric vehicle charging, but also what's occurring on the current ones. But if it's an off-site promotion, no. I mean, if they're selling Skittles inside, then that's fine to advertise that there. But if it's a completely different ad for something that's not occurring on the property or being sold on the property or tied to the property somehow, then in theory, no, or in actuality, no.
That wasn't
good-
presented when the pumps came up before planning commission.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. When
I was talking about the co-op has
Co-op,
them,
yeah.
and they're not advertising
Oh, right.
products that they have there, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And we approved that a long time ago, and I
that
don't
wasn't,
recall any
discussion. there.
television screen on the drawings.
Okay.
So what is the question is, should we allow these a 1 or 2 foot or whatever
Yeah,
sign
right.
over the electric
Yeah.
Well, on the
charger?
cabinet itself that holds the charger.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, every time I would go by, I was like, is that a sign?
Yeah,
Like it just says Tesla on it, but it's incorporated into it. So it's not a sign attached to it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, am I right? Like it's,
I think you can still say that that's a commercial
signage,
message.
yeah.
It's signage.
okay. Yeah. So what are folks thinking about? Say what's in red here? Does that sound good? And the idea of not charging, docking it against the overall,
yeah.
does it sound reasonable?
So I think that I think it would be good to say not just signage, but product messaging or sorry, what was it you just said? Not the Tesla
Yeah.
Commercial message.
commercial message.
I think that's-
Because if it's built into the pump, I think they might argue, and I don't know how that would come out, but if it's built into the product, like those Tesla signs or the Tesla pumps are, they might argue that it's not signage.
Can I read to you the definition of sign?
Please do.
Display designed or intended to convey information to the public in written or pictorial form where such display is made on, attached to, or as part of a structure, surface, or any other thing, including but not limited to the ground, any rock, tree, or other natural object which display is visible beyond the boundaries of the parcel of land on which it is made. The term shall not be construed to include any display of merchandise or temporary signage displayed within a show window. A display of less than 1 square foot in area is excluded from this definition.
So so they could cover it in less than 1 square foot.
But then they're also going to hit up against the maximum allowed per.
All right,
So
well,
that's if it's.
yes, I think,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yep, you're good then with signage, so.
Yeah.
So the 2 square, so you're saying take this 2 square foot per pump out of the entirety of whatever the signage, the
Yeah.
big sheet sign, for example.
You could argue that you could stand on the sidewalk in front of the sheets and still see this signage, but it's really sort of more internal. and
Yeah.
It's not that display that they need to get somebody onto the property. And I'm just trying to figure a way how to allow some signage for these charging stations and fuel pumps that's already existing.
That-
Not go and mess around with the calculation and
Yeah.
make it more complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, the
totally.
Tesla ones are good. I mean, you're coming off the bypass and that's advertising right there and there's no buffer, right? That's great advertising. You're getting off there and you're like, oh, okay. It's the only place in town to charge my fancy Tesla.
Yeah, but
All 8 of my Teslas. Only bring it all at once.
Pat, if you use that automatic feature, it would take you to the gas
Oh,
station.
right.
So
You
the
don't
no-
know.
Well, at you know you're there. Okay. So are we good? Are we good with this suggestion?
Yeah.
And put it into batch A?
Yes.
Excellent.
But and so Arnie, just, I'm trying to, I'm visualizing that Tesla charging station, and in effect, you're talking about those little signs that are next to that says this is the charging station. Okay, so that's, and how big are those? 2 square feet? Oh, no.
I'd have to go back and look to see
Don't
what we
measure, no,
approved.
no, don't take time. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good.
Small.
So that's a batch B, A.
That should be-
Okay. And I think we could probably come up with some entrance corridor design standards tonight. I think we probably could knock that out.
7
and get The
minutes.
whole
Right.
draft done.
Got 7.
So so what do you want to say about that? Because like, I think that's going to be a batch B, obviously,
Right.
right?
And
So-
I didn't know how far we're going to get, and I probably should have provided you with the entrance corridor design standards anyway. So that's on your desk tonight in case we did get into it, but it's up to you. Perhaps just this part, if you could provide some guidance for us. Are you, as a group, wanting to only get into signage? Because we've talked about signage with not Carillion, the other
Blue scale.
Blue
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 scale,
scale.
thank you. When that sign was coming in and we realized it didn't have the base that met all the others, and we realized that we didn't have the coding for all that type of signage, the heights, the style that came in. So that's how most of this came up, I believe. So is it a desire at this point just to talk about sign standards within the entrance corridor? Because you do have 5 different sections, which are landscaping, signage, architecture, site planning, and lighting. Or are you more desirous of going through all of those standards and developing, or at least reviewing all the standards?
I think we should review all of them.
Definitely a batch B.
I think,
Yeah,
yeah, given that we, especially if these apply to the emerging South Main corridor,
Yeah.
be good to be proactive with it.
Okay. And then sorry, jump ahead, but the cottage housing is definitely a B because we have a whole slew of standards to go through there.
And no proposal yet from
No proposal
any
yet.
developers, right?
Correct. So by my count for batch B, we have concessions. We have. What did we just do? Oh, mini warehouses. Entrance corridor design standards and cottage housing.
Keep us busy till 2026. At the rate we go.
Do you want to talk about priorities, prioritizing
Yes.
those
Yeah.
down?
Yeah.
Because what we've done in the 2021 zoning ordinance amendment section, we went through 15 items that were batch A. We had 4 things. We've gotten through 3 of those, but we still have cottage housing. So right now, the established priority for these extra things in batch B is cottage housing.
Mhm.
And unless you tell me otherwise, out of these 4 items that I just read to you, which again are the entrance corridor design standards, cottage housing, concessions, and mini warehouses, I'm going to bring back cottage housing to you unless you reset those priorities.
Would it help just to knock, I don't think concessions is going to take us long. Would it be helpful to knock that one out and then go to cottage?
I defer to how you all want. I agree with you.
Yeah.
That one's not going to take as long. But it's up to you on how you want to.
I would think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
I
I'd like
think
to
that
clean
would
that
not
up.
take the total, months-long thing.
And I would actually also say that because we've got these 2 developments that are in the works that are going to affect or be impacted or impact entrance corridors, I really feel like we should get on that.
Others thoughts on that, on leapfrogging, setting the entrance
I
corridor
would,
ones?
I would agree, and maybe one way to think about it is to, because the entrance corridor, it's a major item, obviously. Maybe we're not going to address everything within it, but we should have a session where among ourselves and with Arnie's help, we understand it better.
Yeah.
Because right now it's a big piece that we don't use that often. And so there might be a way to have a session when we're looking at this, and the opening part would be maybe an overview rather than diving into fixing particular things.
An overview of our current standards, or
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, an overview of this.
And do you think maybe pointing out where the problems could lie, the sorts of things where we might want to focus our attention more, that might be more impactful, that we don't want to miss, that we don't want to have unintended consequences when there's
Right.
development.
And,
Right.
and also the actual location of
Ah.
where they apply
Yeah, we'll do.
on a map.
Yeah.
You know,
We have newer members who,
oh,
who might want to kind of have right, I don't want to speak for the newer members, but what exactly are we talking about? What's at stake? Where is this? And then would that be helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
even older members.
Even old, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
I ask where the 2, I mean, clearly the VDOT property is
Yeah.
one of the entrance corridor ones. What would be
Spotswood
the,
doesn't apply.
Spotswood, well, but Spotswood, people are going to go into that the Nelson Street entrance corridor.
yeah, but just to be clear, Spotswood development would not be in the entrance corridor unless we
No.
really change something. So
Right,
what
right.
we're
That-
dealing with,
That's not what I mean. What I mean is that because these developments are going in close to entrance corridors, I think those entrance corridors are going to be facing increased
Yeah.
pressure to develop. And I think that
I see.
it's good idea to really think about what we want those to look like
Mm.
as the places that people come into our community. And that's the first thing they see.
I'm not sure it's helpful to talk about timelines. I can't remember.
But I was just
what-
gonna say, I mean, the
VDOT
Spotswood and VDOT are at least probably 2 years out, but it'd be good. I mean, as far as
From
they'll,
shovel hitting the ground, you mean?
well, maybe a little bit sooner for Spotswood, but
Mhm.
still a ways away.
Mhm.
My question would be, do we think we're gonna get this request for cottage housing sooner? Otherwise, if not, I agree with what you're saying. If we really think this cottage housing at some point is gonna turn around, though, I'm very disappointed we haven't received anything. Maybe we do
I
that
haven't heard
first.
anything from the property owner recently, but he did submit that application for a cottage housing development. It wasn't complete, so it was turned back to him. So I can only imagine that he's still intent on doing that. From a staff standpoint, it's going to be less work and therefore quicker to get something to you for the cottage housing. Then we're gonna have to do a good bit more research, I believe, if we're gonna look at all the standards in the entrance corridor. And that's why I was asking about the
Okay.
timeline, just to lay that out.
Yeah.
Right, and with cottage, I mean, when we get these things that sometimes they're a year-long project, I forget how long
So I would,
would the cottage be a half a year or 4 months?
I don't even think that's optimism. I agree with Arnie that I don't think cottage housing will be that onerous.
So the entrance corridor one is a bigger project. And so then
Mm-hmm.
are people then okay with staying with the original, like do the concessions? food concessions, cottage.
So
and
I
keep
guess,
that.
actually, let me ask you a question about mini warehouses then. You said you've had 2 requests or inquiries in the last 2 years. What do we allow now?
We allow, what we have in our entrance corridor design standards, which admittedly isn't a lot, but you have that list in front of you
Mhm.
and it's a conditional use permit. So they would have to answer those 3 or 4 criteria for a conditional use, like you've seen for all the other conditional use permits. I can go through those if that's needed. And then what we have in the entrance corridor in the public hearing process. And those have gone away. I mean, as far as I know, those were ideas when I was pointing out that it's a conditional use permit. And one needs a rezoning. The one, I forgot that Russ actually came before.
Yeah.
So thanks for reminding me about that. That requires a rezoning and a conditional use permit and probably maybe even a comp plan amendment.
Right.
So that one is going to be a lot more difficult, and I haven't heard anything since Russ made the proposal, and that's been a while ago.
So it sounds to me in terms of your office's work that doing the cottage for the concessions, food concessions and the cottage housing first.
Yeah, and the
and get-
cottage housing hopefully is supporting additional housing units,
Right.
which is what
So-
we're trying to do.
and giving us more, then as Leslie said, with the timeline being a little bit stretched out with at least more so even on the VDOT property side, which is, so let's go with that. The concessions, cottage housing. And then
But I,
we have to decide that,
yeah, but we might, and maybe it's something we can think about and talk about the next meeting. Think about a way that I mean, the entrance corridor to me is a longer term, more of a planning focus rather than a zoning focus. I don't think it's something we want to be talking about in 2 years from now. So maybe we can think about, again, having 1 half-hour session where we have an overview of it. And what are some of the key issues that we might want to be thinking about, and then decide whether we take it all on or take it on in bits and pieces.
so how much work would that require for Arnie to make
That's
that
why I don't think
presentation?
Arnie wants to do the deep dive.
Right.
Before we kind of get a feel for what we think is important.
Would you be able to more or less give us the highlights, the refresher course on, what is entrance corridor, what's at stake here? That's kind of more off your top of your head. And is that kind of what you're looking at? And then beforehand, we will all have read this and we will all have our own questions about our own, and we can put them out on the table and then have that.
But will we still
correct.
do the other 2 first?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So I think what John's just saying is like a preliminary, get our heads into it and then do the actual work on the other ones that can get done in a.
Maybe
Shorter frame.
included a simple map that just says this is the entrance corridor.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
here,
yeah. Show us what, just to remind everybody what we're,
Is that on the zoning map?
yeah,
C2 zoning districts are, so the bright red splotches on the zoning
Right.
map are your entrance corridors automatically. So anything that's C2 going out
Yeah.
East Nelson Street from Kroger out to Sheets, and then going out South Main, I think the firehouse is already C2. But certainly the funeral home all the way out
Right.
to the hotel.
So I just think that as an overview for the newer members and review for,
Yeah, no,
some of our older people.
yeah,
older members.
these are significant. If
Yeah,
you-
and so we'll have to just, so I think if we could put that,
That what may also be helpful in that is to bring you the preliminary design that Echelon put together for their proposal. Just, it's not the final, but
Yeah.
at least you can say, okay, if something is going to get located here, we're going to be talking about what's next door for design standards, where the entrances are, cross connections aren't, but maybe we should be. So that might help sort of ferret out some of the
Yeah.
Yeah.
discussion.
Yes.
yes.
Okay, so if I could understand concessions first, cottage housing
Yeah.
second, then maybe this preliminary on entrance corridor, and then while we're deciding that, maybe we can do mini warehouses. And then, because you're still going to decide on entrance corridor, how deep or not deep you
Right.
want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask you another question about mini warehouses? So So you've got the, what is this, page and a half? Do you feel like that's pretty complete? Like, is that?
It was very complete when we cut and pasted it from somebody else's. Yeah.
Okay,
There were some that were really late.
That's right. We did actually,
We had a
we combined from several.
you combined. Okay.
But you can always add more about landscaping if you need.
Yes, hedges. We have all about the hedges.
Which I do think it helps to do the quick review of the overlay district and then do the
Yeah.
warehousing, yeah.
That'll
Yeah.
come back up. That'll
Yeah.
come back up here.
Yeah. Okay. Is that good, Arnie? Should we open for public comment then? Are we at that point? Open? Closed. Move on to other, thanks for Kate and Arnie for all of that, all these items and the materials and guiding the discussion. So we'll move on to other business. The first zoning and planning report, you have a little something.
For the planning and zoning, attended a tree board meeting, met with Main Street Lexington to discuss improvements to more alleyways downtown. They have a couple more alleyways that they're targeting for improvements, like they did to the McCrum's Alley. So they're working towards those additional projects. And then I have a couple of things for your major projects. So that's it for the zoning report.
Yeah.
Can I
Okay.
ask you a question about your, the tree board meeting? Do we have a tree ordinance?
We have,
Like
have-
you have to replace big trees that you're taking down, or you have to get permission to take down big trees or anything like that?
is a chapter in the city code. I cannot remember the number, but it's easy to find on our website, the link to the entire code. But it's not very much. And I only had to, I read it through quickly before that meeting because I had not read it before. But the tree board doesn't have a